Are we on now? We're on now. Good. Yes, in our series running up to Christmas, we're looking today at Joseph. And Joseph is the almost invisible man, I always think, in the Christmas story. What little we know about him is that he had a life that was full of problems and troubles, and he fairly quickly disappears from the scene. His first appearance is when his fiancée is pregnant, but somebody else has been the father. So I'm going to read a passage to you. It's from Matthew chapter 1, beginning at verse 18, which is pretty much the most we hear about Joseph in the New Testament. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way when his mother, Mary, had been betrothed to Joseph. Before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband, Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. So there's Joseph, fiancée pregnant. Later on, we know that they travelled, we've just been thinking about it, to Bethlehem, pregnant Mary. All he can find, because he doesn't have a lot of money, a lot of influence or anything like that, is a hopelessly inappropriate place for the birth. And then within 2 years, he is having to flee to Egypt as a refugee to escape the massacre of the infants by Herod's troops. And added to all this tale of woe, in some Christian traditions that believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary, poor Mary and Joseph are even denied the joy of consummating their marriage. Fortunately, the Bible isn't as hung up about sex as some Christians were in a former age. I see Joseph as the patron saint of little people. People who feel insignificant, probably not upfront people, people who can't throw their weight around, people who just muddle along through life. And that's Joseph. We don't hear a lot more about him. He's obviously died by the time Jesus is baptized and starts his ministry. But as I say, when we first meet him, Joseph is established as a carpenter in Nazareth. It's called a town in the Bible. I think we would call it a village. And he's about to marry the girl of his dreams. And then he discovers that Mary is pregnant, and he knows he's not the father. And in the version of the Bible here that I've read, and many of them, it says, as he considered these things, Mary's pregnant. What should I do about that? I don't know why they have considered there, because the word which is translated considered, there's something very funny happening with this microphone, is a word which means angry. And it actually means as Joseph was fuming angry at this. And of course he was angry. He'd been betrayed, he'd been humiliated, everything had gone pear-shaped for him. It was terrible. Had Mary always had another fella that he didn't know about? Who was he? What was going on? Of course, he was angry. And of course, none of this would have happened if God had not stepped into his life. But as well as being angry, we read that Joseph was a just man. He was a Jew. He was quite a serious Jew. And as somebody was pointing out to me after the earlier service, it's interesting the reaction of Jesus' brothers, who are younger than him, to Jesus. But we know that James became the head of the church in Jerusalem. And if you read the letter of James, because that's by James, the brother of Jesus, it's a very Jewish letter. So they were brought up as good Jews by Joseph, who was a just man. And as a Jew and a just man, Joseph knew the law. And the law says this in the book of Deuteronomy: if there is a betrothed virgin and a man meets her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. The young woman, because she did not cry for help, though she was in the city, and the man, because he violated his neighbor's wife. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. And we know that stonings like that still happen because of the incident of Jesus when he was in his ministry and they brought the woman caught in adultery to him and they were going to stone her. So that's what the law said. Joseph was a Jew, and Joseph, of course, was the one who had the right to throw the first stone, because betrothal wasn't like engagement in our culture. Betrothal was the binding legal agreement that Mary and Joseph were committed to one another for life. The marriage ceremony, the big party, they had later, but that was there. That's why it talks about him divorcing her later, because it was that strong a bond. So angry Joseph, not wanting to do this to Mary because he loved her, he resolves that he will divorce her quietly. And that meant he would have gone with a letter saying that their relationship was over, and would have taken 2 witnesses with him. That's the quietest way he could do it. Nowadays, you break a relationship by text, I'm told. That's the quiet way to do it. But then, an angel comes to him in a dream. And the angel says to him, "Go ahead, Joseph, and marry Mary. She is innocent. She hasn't been playing around. Nobody spiked her drink. This is God coming into our world via Mary's womb, just as the prophets had promised. Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." And after that, Joseph is faced with a lose-lose decision. He either loses Mary or he loses face completely. Because if he marries Mary, everyone will assume that the baby is his. And this is a small community. They will know all about it. And you can imagine down the pub, there'll be nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Who's been a naughty boy then? This is Joseph, the righteous Jew. And how has he fallen? And he would live with all his life. And we actually know 30 years later, Jesus, when he was in his ministry, would be challenged about being conceived out of wedlock. You see, small communities don't forget these things. They know all about them, don't they? I remember having a group of boys on a camp, and they were in the group that I was in charge of, and they both came from a small, almost feudal village in Yorkshire. And it was fascinating to hear them talking at night, because they knew the pedigree of every cat in their village. They knew who was the Tom and who was the mum. That's what small communities are like, isn't it? That's what Joseph was going to face. And I think there's another thing which shows the awfulness of this thing that Joseph was being asked to do, which is the rather strange thing that he took Mary with him when, as we've been reminded, they had to go to Bethlehem for the census. The Romans counted men, not women. Why did Joseph take this lady, particularly when she's pregnant, his wife, why did he take her to Bethlehem? And why did they stay in Bethlehem after Jesus was born? People familiar with the Middle East think the answer is probably quite clear. He took Mary out of Nazareth to protect her from the abuse that she would have suffered once he was off the scene and not there to protect her. To protect her from all that had gone on, and not least possibly from her own family. Think of the shame that had come upon their family because Mary was pregnant before they'd had the marriage ceremony. That's the situation they were in. That's what Joseph was taking on. Now, Joseph was only a village carpenter, but I'm sure God chose carefully that man who was going to be the parent of Jesus, who was going to guide and teach Jesus through his most formative years. And I think there are two things that we can learn from the life of Joseph. And the first, which may be appropriate from what Steve's been saying about this service, is that human plans can go pear-shaped when God gets involved. You see, Joseph, before all this, had everything worked out. He was a carpenter. He had a steady job, steady work, a standing as a respectable tradesman within the community. He was looking forward to being happily married to Mary, who was quite a good catch. And just life was all good, hunky-dory. And then God steps in. And from Joseph's perspective, everything goes pear-shaped. It goes wrong. The embarrassment and the humiliation of Mary's pregnancy, moving away to Bethlehem, then having to flee as a refugee to Egypt, to a strange country. None of this would have happened if God had not stepped in. Madame Guyon was a great prayer warrior and writer in an earlier age in France. And she said this about the Christian life. If knowing answers to life's questions is absolutely necessary to you, then forget the journey. You will never make it, for this is a journey of unknowables, of unanswered questions, enigmas, incomprehensibles, and most of all, things unfair. Now, in my experience, that rings true. You see before you a medical doctor who never practiced medicine. Someone who is going to be a missionary in Africa who's never been to Africa. Someone whose plan was to retire to Sheffield who ended up in Liskeard. Our plans change when God gets involved. And of course, you find the same in the New Testament. Jesus lives a good life and ends up being crucified and rejected. If you read through the Acts of the Apostles, you see the way that things change and chop and so on, and it's fairly chaotic for a lot of the time. And they end up getting killed as well. The early churches are full of problems. If they hadn't been full of problems, we wouldn't have all the letters in the New Testament. But you see, it's through all of those things that God's kingdom is growing. So when things go wrong in your life and don't work out as planned, don't think that God's abandoned you. Trust him to be working in and through your difficulties. The second thing we learn from Jesus is this. It is about trust, his trust in God. Is this working? I feel as though it is. Good, thank you. I can't hear anything myself. His trust in God. It was that trust that gave him the courage and the strength to live through all those difficulties. Even though he couldn't have understood what was going on, he was way ahead. He knew the way ahead was going to be difficult. He took Mary and he cared for her, and he lived a life of trust in God. And we're called to live a life of trust in God as well. One of the scriptures that Joseph would have known, and that is one of the great verses, I think, on trust, comes at the end of the little book by the prophet Habakkuk, which begins with a big question, because Habakkuk's world is falling apart. There's an army invading, slaughtering, raping, and everything. And he says, God, why are you allowing this? I'm not going to tell you the whole story. But right at the very end, we find these words. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be out of the field, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Words Joseph would have known, that everything goes wrong, totally pear-shaped, yet I will rejoice in the world. You see, God does not change. He is completely reliable and trustworthy, even when he's hidden and we can't understand what's going on. But you may object. Joseph had an angel came and visited him in a dream. God, if you send me an angel whenever I'm faced with a problem, I'll be much better at following you than I am at the moment. So it's a bit unfair. Joseph got an angel, didn't he? But we have something much more sure than an angel. Matthew comments on this story, and he says this, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. God with us. God with us in the coming of Jesus. God with us in the giving of the Holy Spirit to live within us. God is with us. What a tremendous truth Graham Kendrick wrote several songs about Emmanuel. One has these words: Emmanuel, God is with us, sharing my humanness, my shame, feeling my weaknesses, my pain, taking the punishment, the blame. Emmanuel, God with us. And this is fact. It's not feeling. It's rooted in history. You see, it's much better than an angel coming to you in a dream, because you know when you had a dream, if you can remember it in the morning, you wake up and you think, oh, was God saying something to me? Or was it that dodgy piece of cheese I ate last night? This is a fact. It's rooted in history, that God is with us and he is completely trustworthy. And did you feel that? There it is again. Did you feel it? No. That was the earth rotating on its axis. I didn't feel it either. The earth is rotating on an axis. You don't feel it, but you know it's true. You accept it. It's there. It's true. Why is it that we can accept that without any feelings, but when the God who makes the earth rotate on its axis and orbit the sun disappears out of our view, the feelings go, we think he isn't with us? God is with us all the time, whether we feel it or not. You know, an essential part of growing as a Christian is going through times when it feels like God has disappeared. Life is no longer warm and exciting and happy and joy-filled. I was reading recently in a book by a man called Philip Yancey, who's a very fine American Christian writer, where he tells of a time when he experienced a sense of abandonment, no feelings at all. And this is what he says. He said, "Suddenly the darkness descended. For an entire year, my prayers seemed to go nowhere. I had no confidence that God was listening. When no techniques or spiritual disciplines seemed to work for me, I bought a book of hours." That's more in the high church tradition. It's just a book with readings and prayers to use day by day. And throughout the year, I simply read the prayers and Bible passages. I told God, I have no words of my own. Maybe I have no faith. Please accept these prayers of others as the only ones I can offer right now. Accept their words in place of my own. For a year. That is trusting in the fact that God is with us when I can't feel him, no feeling at all. That's why Philip Yancey writes such brilliant books. And Joseph shows us what it means to trust when things are hard. He is only a bit part player in the story of Jesus. Jesus would have been born without him, but he is a true hero of faith. Christopher Reeve is the actor who played the original Superman. And Christopher Reeve was paralyzed from the neck down in a horse riding accident in 1995. And after his accident, he made this comment. When the first Superman movie came out, I was frequently asked, what is a hero? I remember the glib response I repeated so many times. My answer was that a hero is someone who commits a courageous action without considering the consequences, a soldier who crawls out of a foxhole to drag an injured buddy to safety. Now my definition is completely different. I think a hero is an ordinary individual who finds strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles. Remember Joseph and trust Emmanuel.